Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. It's a long time coming. We are back with another episode of the podcast. I'm joined by Kevin Flaherty. We're going to discuss everything that has gone on in the last couple months with Kansas football recruiting. It's going to be a two-part episode, so stay tuned if you're a VIP subscriber. We've got a fun kind of Q&A coming later. You'll be able to find that on the website. We'll end up running this on 4th of July. Which, Kevin, I got to be very thankful this year. There are no commitments planned on the 4th of July. A few years ago, it felt like everybody was, deciding in June. They'd wait till 4th of July to announce their decision, right? This year, nothing. So with us having some free time on 4th of July, Kevin, what sort of plans you guys got going on for the 4th?
We have a friend in Lawrence who pretty much always hosts this big thing over at his house. He's got a big backyard, and the kids can go out there and potentially let off some things that you aren't supposed to let off necessarily in the city of Lawrence. So we'll keep that on low a little bit.
I love it. Not too much. I mean, we're in our apartment, so there's not like a lawn we can go hang out at. So we're gonna go. One of my buddies who plays golf with me occasionally, we're gonna go play some golf on the 4th and spend the afternoon burning up outside, having some fun. But yeah, can't complain. It'll be fun to get outdoors and enjoy. Hopefully, not a rainy day. So, all right, we got a lot to get into, Kevin.
Yeah.
Let's start, I think, with a very interesting dynamic for KU. Obviously, they go into the summer. A lot of the class has already been filled at that point. Really, the things that KU was looking for, right? A defensive tackle, getting another tight end. Those were some of the, I think, really big needs that KU had. And we can talk about tight end first, because I think that was a position that really was super fascinating to track going into the month. Obviously, KU gets Kevin Sullivan on campus for an official visit that kind of May 30th weekend. Ian Premer comes in the following weekend. And a lot kind of happened in that time frame. Obviously, KU misses out on Ian Premer. I know you on your podcast, right? Verbal Commitment, you guys did a great job of covering everything going on with that recruitment. Let's start talking about that, because I think that recruitment is interesting. Even if he did not go to Kansas, he ends up at Notre Dame. That was one where KU was in it for a very long time, and then kind of right at the finish line, it seemed like things went away from KU, and we'll get into some of the dynamics of what kind of took place where KU kind of had to make some business decisions with its own tight end spot. But, Kevin, from your perspective, like that recruitment, a good example of, I think, a player who kept things close to the vest along the way, and a whole lot of projecting from the outside. And I think that's something I mentioned on the board, was like, you can read every single update and you know where it's coming from. So just a weird recruitment that KU was definitely in for a long time, but one that KU probably was not in the top 2, maybe even top 3 at the end.
Yeah, I think it was one of those where Ian played things close to his vest, and as you know, he wasn't really talking to a whole lot.
I tried.
And so, that whole the firsthand experience of saying, hey, I'm talking to this guy, this is what he's seeing, which is kind of at the heart of what we do. It wasn't there. And so you kind of really got to see who people were talking to, if they were talking to one staff or another, maybe they were talking to the high school coach. And I think Ian had everybody's head spinning. I'll be honest with you. I didn't think he was going to go to Notre Dame, and we were talking to Ian. I thought he loved Iowa State, loved Mauser there. They did a great job recruiting him.
Yeah.
Kansas did a great job recruiting him. I think he really liked Lubick. I think he enjoyed talking football with Lubick. I think ultimately from the Kansas side, and if you want to look at it a different way, the reason he picked Notre Dame maybe even is you had that winning history and that consistent winning history. I think Ryan said that Notre Dame hasn't finished lower than 18th in the AP poll in something like a decade. They played for a national title last year. And obviously, with Marcus Freeman there, you would think that Notre Dame would continue to have, maybe consistent success. And another thing that Ian always talked to us about was he wanted a school that had a proven track record of utilizing the tight end. At Kansas, that's maybe a little bit shakier, and that's not something that's on Lubick. I mean, Lubick just got here, right? But a year ago with Grimes, that wasn't the
Mm.
major priority in terms of that. And so you look at on one end, you say, well, Kansas didn't really win last year, didn't go to a bowl, didn't really use the tight end, and then you have Notre Dame over here that has this demonstrated, hey, we're going to feed the tight end when we got a guy that we like. They've been winning, and so I think that was kind of the thing that separated the Fighting Irish in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I think with recruitments, right, sometimes can be forgotten is the fact that when it comes down to decision making time, that's when everything's kind of out.
Yeah,
You lay out the plan and the vision and everything. And so for a
sure.
long time, right, the relationship with Lubick was really important. Obviously,
Yeah,
the amount of in-state commits KU had in the class, right? Those guys were recruiting Ian, makes him feel at home. And then when you get down to like talking about, okay, where am I actually going to go? And that's why that kind of week that we saw where he took the visit to K-State and then took a few days to go down and really kind of hash it all out. And so obviously he ends up going to Notre Dame. And a reason I think too that maybe didn't necessarily help KU's chances was the fact that KU decides to take Kevin Sullivan. And that's a decision that I think KU had to make
sure.
because tight end has been such a severely under recruited position for KU. They've taken two high school tight ends, Jaden Ham, Carson Brune, right? And they need to really bolster that room. And it's a position KU's going to need to take a transfer in this fall,
Yeah,
or this winter, I should say. So KU needed two tight ends. Obviously, they've got Jack Oots, who they got back in January, right? Kind of more of a blocking tight end, a guy who has made it no secret that he's very happy to block and go
yeah,
smash some heads. So you need maybe more of a receiving tight end. And in the ideal scenario, obviously, that would be Ian. But then the situation comes with Kevin Sullivan, where really that recruitment was Iowa State, KU, Missouri. For a long time, it looked like Missouri was going to be the team to beat. Then Missouri takes a guy, Isaac Jensen from Nebraska. They shut down tight end recruiting. And then it comes down to KU and Iowa State. And I think it was pretty clear to Kevin Sullivan that, hey, KU had Dominic Berry coming in for a visit that weekend. And it was pretty clear, like, Dominic Berry's not coming here to visit and go take other visits. Like, I think he would have committed if he took that visit. And so Sullivan had a decision. He got first dibs and takes it. And I think there's a reason, this is a commitment I think that's going to fly under the radar some because so many eyes were on Ian and his decision. But man, like the offer list is there. You go back to January, every single time I was on, Twitter, it felt like, oh, Kevin Sullivan, new offer, right? Texas offers him
yep,
late in the spring, and they try to kind of kick the tires on the recruitment and see where it could go. And, he's a player that, just checks a lot of boxes, Kevin. Basketball background, which I love for tight ends. I think that's a really important thing for just overall athleticism. 6'6", good athlete, shows good hands on his high school tape. I think it's the type of recruitment that if you were to take Ian Premer, I should say, out of the equation and just have a Kevin Sullivan recruitment, like you'd be fired up about it. And so I think that's a really big addition for KU. And then you pair him with Oots, and man, I like that tandem, having a guy that maybe is more receiver, can develop as a blocker, and then a guy that's more of a blocker that can develop into a receiver. I think that's a really good tandem to have at the tight end position.
yeah. I love the way you put that because this is a guy that if Ian Premer just didn't exist, if you made it into a Marvel movie and it's another dimension and Ian Premer just isn't in that dimension,
Mm-hmm.
you're really excited about Kevin Sullivan. I still have some sources down at Texas and kind of asked them about Sullivan and about Texas, as you put it, kicking the tires on him. And they said Texas has had success with 3-star kids with these kinds of frames and
Mm-hmm.
athleticism, basketball backgrounds, and they brought them in and developed them and had a lot of success. It wasn't. It was one of those things where they really saw something there with Kevin Sullivan. And I think when you look at the way Rockhurst uses him, on the goal line, they're putting him out at wide receiver, and having him run routes and go high point the ball. And so he does have maybe a little bit of that upside as a receiver that you don't see as much with Oots. The flip side of that is Oots, I think, is a better receiver than people give him credit for. The strength is in the blocking, like
Yes.
you mentioned. And you love the attitude too, because he is very much a guy that's like, I'll knock 3 guys over, get turf in my face mask if we get a touchdown. Like, that's cool with me. And you love having that guy in your room. And I I'm blanking on the kid's name who went to Mississippi State that KU had committed in last year's class.
Joseph Skipworth.
Thank you. If you would have had Skipworth, I'm not saying you would have counted on Skipworth to carry your tight end room next year, obviously, but you would have been able to grow the room more from a high school basis potentially. And missing there, having the low number of high school guys, like you mentioned, you had to take at least 2 in this class, and you needed an impact guy in this class. And I think Ian was the guy that would have been that impact guy that would have played immediately pretty much. Even with him, not being a 250-pound guy, they would have found a way to get him out there and utilize him. With Ian now headed to Notre Dame, I think Kansas will probably take that third tight end either in a JUCO guy that they find in the fall or in the transfer portal. In the transfer portal, I saw the reaction there. The transfer portal being more likely. I'm just saying you're going to take an older tight end that you feel good about impacting the room right away, and that's just because of the guys you're losing after this year with Hanukkah, with Leighton, with all those guys.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll get into it later, Kevin. I got some numbers for you on JUCO recruiting and why it should be a no-go for KU. But yeah, so I think tight end, look, KU needed to. I think if you were to tell, Lance Leipold at the start of January, you're going to get to July 1st and you're going to have Kevin Sullivan and Jack Oots committed, I think they would have signed up for that right away. And so for KU now, right, that's a good start. And you're right. It will be a transfer portal edition in the winter. You're guaranteed to lose 2. You may lose 3 depending on what Leighton Keir does, because he may be able to get a medical red shirt. But obviously, that's a decision and a conversation for December, not July. So another position I think that was really interesting going into the month was defensive tackle. Man, a lot happened. Yes. So for context, Landon Anderson is a player who committed to KU back in January. He was a part of kind of that big wave of commitments that took place when KU had the really successful kind of junior day run. And so he commits to KU. And as we've discussed, Kevin, and I think that a lot of people who follow KU football recruiting know, there's pretty much a zero tolerance policy on visits, right? Sure. If you're a committed player, you're committed. Like, I just got married. I'm not going to go date some other girl. Like, I have no desire to do that. But if you're committed to KU, you got to stick to it. And that didn't happen. And so Anderson took a visit to Arizona State, then went to saw KU, and then he was going to go see Oklahoma State and Baylor. And basically KU more or less made it clear that they were going to cut ties. And a part of that is, I think, Anderson trying to leverage KU for more NIL money that was not going to come. And as a result, they go separate ways. And so at the start of the month, KU was trying to make a run at Alistair Vallejo. That's a guy that Jim Panagos was on for months. Kind of a fluky situation, right? Michigan, Notre Dame come in and offer. You can't really get in NIL bidding wars with those two schools. So he ends up going to Michigan. Then KU pivots, and the first guy they get is Naquane Carter. And it's so funny how a recruitment like this works out, where Panagos offered Carter in September of last year. So it was early in his junior season when he offered, and Carter was able to take a visit to KU in the spring where he got to see campus, be around it. Then he came back for an official visit at the end of the month, and KU was able to get him on board. And I think I put in our player commitment breakdown that he reminds me a lot of Devin Phillips, right? A high school version of that, where he's not going to be the tallest, but man, he's strong and he's got a good first step off the ball. And I think if you look at him down the road, you could see him kind of playing that Devin Phillips role, a guy that can take on 2 blockers, eat double teams, and really kind of make the most of that situation. So in the span of a couple of days, right, KU gets Naquane Carter on board, and then Anderson decommits. And so they've got one guy committed at that point in time. They get another one we'll cover in a second. But with Carter, Kevin, what do you like about it? I just generally, I like the athleticism. Good power for someone of his size right now. So I think really good upside for him in the long run.
Yeah, I love the comp that you made. I love the Devin Phillips comp when you wrote it. And part of the reason is I think Devin Phillips, even when he got his weight up, was a guy that was a lot more agile than you would think for being sort of a sawed-off, wide-bodied type of guy. And you see that with Carter. You see the wrestling background come out. He can really shock guys with his hands. There are some clips there where you see him just absolutely overwhelm guys with the power. And you have to remind yourself, this guy's going to be 300 plus pounds. He's 30 plus pounds below that.
Mm-hmm.
How much stronger is he going to get? And so I think you're absolutely right. You have somebody that can move a little bit, has some agility, but even beyond that, really projects as somebody that's going to hold the point of attack, get
Mm-hmm.
underneath guys' pads, and really be tough to move off the spot. And so I thought this was a good evaluation, like you said, way back when he made it. But for him to still be around and be able to take that, and look, like I really liked Landon Anderson. Like I don't hide from that. I thought he was one of the better players probably in Kansas's class. But you get to a point where a guy's worth is directly tied to a dollar amount. It's directly tied to, hey, how much effort are we having to put in to keep this guy into the boat? And I think, when you look at Carter and you look at the guy that we're going to talk about in just a minute, I think Kansas did a really nice job of sort of circling the wagons and making up for that loss.
Exactly. And, Carter was very much trending to KU before Anderson decommitted.
Yeah.
And I will say too, like, here's the thing about, recruiting this day and age and why KU handles it the way they are. If you got a high school guy trying to leverage you before he stepped foot on campus, what's going to happen as soon as he takes the field and has halfway of a good season?
Yep.
Right? That's just part of the whole thing right now, where players have power and coaching staffs also have power. And so there very much can be these power struggles. And I think for KU, right, the culture we've talked about so much over time, but you've got to protect that. And I don't think you can risk having making exceptions, because then you really get into some deep water of having to figure out, okay, well, hey, you made an exception for this guy. What about this? It's got to be even across the board. And so KU pivots from Landon Anderson to Lucas Smalls-Allen.
Yeah.
Another guy that, Panagos had been on for a long time, right? KU started recruiting him. Lucas told me he first heard from Panagos back in January. KU didn't offer till May, but it was one of those where early on, I think Panagos identified him. Lucas said, I think the KU coaches went out to see him in January and then again in the spring. So this is one where I think for a long time, KU was monitoring, and then they make an offer in May. And then that really interesting recruitment where Wake Forest tried to squeeze him. They really tried to get him on board and at the start of the month. And then, KU had a really good relationship with them and said, hey, just wait and we'll take you. And, Smalls-Allen took his visit and liked it, took a few days, and there's some other stuff going on behind the scenes, and he ends up committing. And so for KU now, you basically have someone in Quayne Carter that's kind of your Devin Phillips mold. Maybe even kind of Tommy Dunnish, if you will. And then you've got someone in Smalls-Allen who's more of that DJ Withers, Blake Harreld role, where it's kind of like 6'4", long, good athlete, just needs to put on weight. And I think the good thing for Smalls-Allen is he is way further ahead than DJ Withers and Blake Harreld were, where those two guys were 240 to 260 when they arrived on campus. I think Smalls-Allen will arrive on campus 275, maybe even 280-ish. So he will be ahead in terms of the weight part, and that's always a big barometer to get on the field, especially playing defensive tackle.
Yeah, this is a Jim Panagos special, right? Like if somebody were to ask you and say, okay, what type of or prototype of high school guy does Jim Panagos like to take? You'd say, okay, a long athletic guy, 6'3", 6'4", probably a high school edge or something like that, who's not quite twitchy enough to be an edge, but has some athleticism, has the body to get to be really big. And that's Smalls-Allen. Sorry, I said Hammond because another guy like that was Cheese Hammond.
Yeah.
He was another sort of body type like that out of high school. I still say we should call him Ham and Cheese, but that's another thing altogether. But no, I mean, these are the types of guys that Panagos wins with, right? Like we saw the development with DJ Withers. We're seeing the development in real time with Blake Harreld, a guy that I know both of us are incredibly high on and think that he has a lot of potential. And so he fits that mold really well. I think, too, he's stronger than you would think, given the frame and everything. I know we've talked about this before. Some colleges, they have like certain triggers to hit, like with shot put. And so it's like, hey, if we like a line type guy, he throws 45 plus, we're offering that guy. Smalls, Allen, I think 48 and a half, something like that shot put.
Yep.
And so when you look at that, the core strength is there, and the strength level is only going to get higher as he gets up to that 300, 310 range.
Exactly. And then you can look at kind of KU's defensive line class overall now, and it's got a really good mix. You've got, Hunter Higgins, who can play on the strong side. You've got Drayden Punt, who could honestly play either side. He's going to
Yeah.
be a little lean coming to college, right? He's playing on the Pumas grassroots circuit. So, like, he's
Yeah.
hooping. But, he could play either side. Then you've got your two defensive tackles. So you've got a whole defensive line class. And honestly, this whole front six class, I really like. I think you get into linebacker and Joseph Credit, Josh Galbraith. I think overall the front six is something that KU really took a focus on this class and really did, I think, have some good success, and they got a lot of their key targets, right? I think you look at the board at linebacker, right? I think the two top names the whole time were Galbraith and Credit, and they're able to get Credit on board at the end of April.
Yep.
You can look at defensive end, right? They got Punt and Higgins in the month of January. So I think you really look at KU and they got their top targets at those spots. I think Credit's underrated. If you're a subscriber, you may have read on Thursday my story about it. I think Credit should be higher than an 86 grade, but whatever. I don't do the grades for 24/7. I just give my opinions on them, but that's kind of my thought. But yeah, overall, I think between defensive end and linebacker, and then even looking at the two defensive tackles KU got, like, it's a front six that I think looks really good on paper in the long term. They may need some time to develop, but I think that the traits and the things that KU looks for, they're all there.
Yeah, it's crazy because obviously the top guy in the class is JJ Dunnigan. But I think if you were to look at sort of position group or not, the strongest one is that front six that you talk about. I think Hunter Higgins is a guy that has a good shot to get that 4-star. He's already an 89. A 90 is what you need to get the 4-star. Remember, when you watch Hunter Higgins' tape last year, he was having back problems and didn't go into the season healthy at all. I think a fully healthy Hunter Higgins this year is somebody that could surprise a lot of people. And I say that thinking that Drayden Punt has as much upside as anybody in this class, with as athletic as he is on the edge, the frame that he has, all those things. Like you said, it's going to take him some time to get there. But at the same time, we said last year, I feel like you and I talking about Adrian Hawley and being a starter kit, right, for what you want for that edge position. I think Drayden Punt has a lot of similar traits, and maybe in some cases some even better traits than Adrian Hawley, who wound up being a 4-star guy.
Yeah, he did. Man, if you want to talk about being around summer camps, right? You walk by Adrian Hawley right now, he does not look like he's going to be entering his freshman season.
No.
But man, he has put on some good weight, and he's such a good kid too. Like, he's someone I'll be kind of quietly rooting for. All right, so Kevin, let's take a step back then. You look at KU's class overall, 19 players committed. I think that's where it's going to sit. Unless there's a random flip that happens in the winter, but I don't really think that's on the cards right now. 19 overall. You look at the Big 12 rankings, right? Number 2, they're sitting just inside the top 30 nationally. I think for me, I like to look at the average commit rating because the point system can be skewed, right? You have a lot more commits, you're going to get a lot more points. But even when you look at the average commit rating for KU, right, it sits at 87.24. That is in line with the rest of the Big 12. It's kind of in that upper half, kind of top third of the Big 12. And, high school recruiting in the age of the transfer portal, where Big 12 football teams may not always have as much money as some of those big time SEC and Big 10 schools, high school recruiting is going to become even more important. Yep. And being able to recruit guys that are good high school prospects that fit your program is going to be really important for Big 12 teams. And I think outside of Tech, right, where they can kind of go back to the portal and reload, I think that high school recruiting is going to be really important for the future of the Big 12, where I think transfers are going to go up in value every year. And it's going to be hard for some schools to go to the portal every year like KU did and go and get 20 guys who you're expecting to be on your 2 deep. So overall for KU, this has been a very positive class. It's a class that I think checks a lot of boxes. You're really revitalizing some positions as well. So overall, KU goes into the dead period in a really good spot, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, a big part of that revitalization too is the way they played in state. I mean,
Totally.
I like the out of state guys that they've been able to cherry pick, but when you go out and land, what is it? I'm sorry, it's what, 7 of the top 12, something like that
Yeah. Yeah.
ish, and so I think when you look at that compared to what Kansas has typically done in state, they've really presented themselves as a legitimate option for these guys, and that wasn't the case before. You and I,
Mhm.
we talked to a top prospect's dad a couple classes ago who said, "Hey, if my kid stays in state, there's only one school I can send him to," and Kansas has changed that. They've made themselves a really legitimate choice, not just for, hey, this guy grew up at KU, like Devin Neal having, James Sims posters on his wall. It JJ Dunnigan is a K-State legacy. Tyron Parker is a guy that a lot of people thought would go to K-State early on.
Mhm.
Josh
Yeah.
Galbraith was a guy you had to fight for to get. Hunter Higgins was a guy that a lot of people had locked into Wisconsin. And so when you sort of go down the list, Kansas is winning a lot more recruiting battles, I feel like, in this class, Swain, than maybe they have in the past.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to, I think finally KU's in the spot now where these relationships are built over time.
Yeah.
We talked about Naquane Carter, right? You offer him in September. That's a long time to really build a good relationship. And I think the coaching staff um, is at the point now with in-state players where they're able to get a year and a half of recruiting time. And I
Yep.
think that's just such an important part that I think for so long was missing because, Kevin, you can go back to the Les Miles staffs. Yeah, they didn't really prioritize in-state recruiting to begin with, but there was also staff turnover.
Yeah.
And that is such a critical piece to this where you can look at guys going to summer camps, right? You go back to the summer camps last year, how loaded those things were.
Yep.
Well, Nate Sims got to work with Terrence Samuel at camp. And
Yep.
that's kind of something that can kickstart your relationship. 6 months later, he's committed. Josh Galbraith goes in camps, works with Chris Simpson. He knows that Simpson's going to be the linebackers coach at KU. And I think that the staff continuity aspect of things, regardless of what happens at coordinator level, because the coordinators aren't that involved in recruiting. They really aren't. Like Jeff Grimes was not doing much recruiting. Andy Koldenecki was not doing much recruiting. And Jim Zabrowski, I think, is doing a little bit more recruiting than some of those other guys did in the past because I think that's just kind of his personality.
Yeah.
But it's about position coaches and having continuity there. And I think for KU to be able to have some of that now year over year is really helping with the in-state kids. And I just think generally going out of state, right? You're going to the same high schools year in, year out. And those guys are coming in as sophomores and you still see a KU coach walk the hallway. And guess what? That same KU coach that was walking the hallway in 2022 is walking it in 2025. So I think that's a really important piece to the puzzle for KU as well. It's just having staff continuity where the faces are the same. Yes, there's changes every year. You're not going to have 100% staff continuity for 4 years, but
Sure.
can you have a lot of those core members there? And I think KU's done a really good job of keeping that continuity.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We've said all along that this is a relationship based staff. And when they have the time to build relationships, to get kids on campus, to deal with their high school coaches for a
Yeah.
prolonged period of time, that's where this staff's, I think, bread is sort of buttered on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, and I really want to bring up one more guy that we can talk about here, Kevin,
Sure.
and that's Corey Mockery, because it is such a great
Yeah.
example of the relationship side of things. Um, I mean, the kid's basically from East Lansing,
Yeah.
like if like we're being real here, from up the road, and man, this is just such an interesting recruitment where obviously Terrence Samuel coached at Michigan State, knew Corey's dad, and KU was able to overcome Michigan State wanting him badly, like really badly. And because of the relationship Samuel had with Corey and the fact that I think KU really showed him that, hey, as a program trending in the right direction, look at all the facilities, all this stuff, right? They're able to get him. And I mean, as a running back prospect, I think the 88 grade's good. I think it's accurate, but I think he just brings so much versatility to the room.
Sure.
He's the type of player that I think just it's such a big time addition when you're going into Michigan again and getting a kid with over 30 offers who Michigan State wanted, who plenty of Big Ten teams wanted, and you're able to get him to come down to Kansas, right? It's not short, but KU continues to recruit Michigan really well. And I think this is, again, a good example of just the relationship side of things and why having that continuity is so important.
Yeah, you mentioned the versatility. I mean, that's what jumps out when you watch him play. I mean,
Totally.
it's one thing to motion a running back out and have him in the slot or something like that. Corey's playing like X wide receiver, at times on tape and actually running like a legitimate route tree. And that's a little bit different than what KU has had. But you make a great point about the recruitment. They were in on some really good running backs in this class. And you were wondering, hey, are they going to get one of these top guys? You had Batman, Katie Davis, Katie Jones, yeah, who winds up going to Oklahoma State. Zephan Walker was a guy that they really, went after, and now he's headed to Oklahoma. But like Corey was in that group, like with those guys, where you felt like, hey, if you get one of these guys, you're feeling really good about the job you've done at the running back position. And so for them to go up into Big Ten country and get a Mockery to come down was a big deal.
Exactly. And you're right. And it makes it hard now. KU's looking for 2 running backs. It makes it hard to go out and recruit another running back when you're saying, hey, we already got this guy who's pretty good. We want you, but we got a guy. But you want to come play with them? You want to come play with them? Like, that's such a hard recruit. Like, I do not envy Jonathan Wallace in that situation, going into the, the family's living room, so to speak, and, sitting down with them and talking, be like, we got Corey, he's really good. Law schools wanted him, but we want your son though. Like, that's such a hard spot to be in. And so we'll see what happens with that second spot. It might go to the portal and you may go get another kind of LeSean Williams style of player, experienced guy that you can add to the room. But I think outside of that, you look up and down the class, and KU really did fill a lot of its needs. And that's really all you can ask for. Going to 19 players, right? It's gonna be one of the bigger classes, if not the biggest class. I should have looked this up ahead of time. It may actually be the biggest class that Leipold has signed.
How big was the DJ Warner class?
The DJ Warner one was about 17 or 18, I want to say. I'm pulling it up right now.
All right.
It was, here we go, 2024 class. I'm going to stall. 17.
17. Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, it is the biggest high school class that Leipold signed. And I think it's a good time to sign a big class, right? When you have so much momentum, and you've in KU's done a good job of landing some really, highly coveted, highly evaluated players. And, it's a good time to add it, not when you're adding a bunch of 82 or 83 rated players. So overall, I think this recruiting cycle has been a success. Obviously, the way it ends, where, Alistair Vallejo goes somewhere else and Ian Premer goes somewhere else. Jason Bradford goes to TCU. Like, those are 3 kind of marquee blue chip guys that you're in on that end up going elsewhere. So of course it's going to not feel maybe the best, but man, like, if you were to, all right, how about this, Kevin?
All right.
If you're going to flip this class and reverse the order,
okay,
the vibe right now would be just insane, right?
Yeah.
Because you're talking about in closing time for the class, you're talking about getting your quarterback in Jalen Mason. You're talking about getting JJ Dunnigan. You're talking about getting Hunter Higgins. Like, it would have been oh my God, what is going on summer? And instead we had oh my God, what is going on January?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you got to keep it all in perspective that, hey, yeah, some big targets went elsewhere at the end. That's going to happen. That's recruiting. But I think big picture, right, this is a really darn good class for KU as they go into the fall.
Yeah, especially talking about the noise they made locally. I mean, like you're saying, if you flip the class and it's like, okay, you got JJ Dunnigan, you got Hunter Higgins, you've got Nate Sims and Tyron Parker and all these guys hopping in, you would be just beside yourself. Caden Snyder being another one. Have you seen him lately? I mean, the dude is so. When we saw him in person last summer, he was coming off of an illness, and he was probably about 235 pounds. Mm-hmm. When I saw him at Sharp about a month ago, Swain, he's like 280 and he looks good. Like
Yeah,
he
he's
looks really
290.
good. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one. I mean, man, bummer for him that he got sick.
Yeah.
Good for KU though, because he would have gotten a lot more offers, and
Oh,
that
for
would have been
sure.
maybe even a different recruitment. So obviously, it works out well for KU. This is a question I'm sure we'll get, Kevin. And keep in mind, right, we got another kind of 30 minutes coming if you're a subscriber. So stay tuned. But what's your confidence level in KU keeping everyone?
I think it's pretty high. And I think a big part of it is one, I know I keep bringing up local guys, but local guys are less likely to decommit. And all those guys, the relationships that they build, the way they are in the group chat, I think I think they're keeping this class together pretty well. Could there be somebody that, of course, it's recruiting, where you could get a November or December guy flipping around. But generally speaking, I feel like this class is so close knit in addition to everything else that it makes it hard to foresee like a specific guy doing that. Whereas I feel like usually by this point, you've got like a specific guy that you're almost looking at, right? Like I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah, this guy might pull back or might go somewhere. Swain, I don't know who it would be.
Yeah, I don't either. You just got to win football games.
Yeah.
I think I said the same thing last year about the class. Like, you just win football games, and the class will stay together. I agree with you. Like, I think that the closeness, especially having so many in-state guys, um, there, I think I think there's a good chance the 19 is the 19 that sign at the end of this cycle. Obviously Landon Anderson, that all happened, but I don't see anyone else messing around and taking other visits in the fall.
Yeah.
JJ would have been the one, but he shut it down. And so, that was one that I think people thought, hey, is he going to take summer official visits? Is he going to take other visits in the spring? No, never did. Kept
Yeah.
it shut down. And so, overall for KU, though, really good class. So, all right, Kevin, I'll give you a chance. Any final thoughts on things heading into the fall?
No, I actually wanted to ask you a question really quick, and
Okay.
it may come up in the actual question and answer part of it. So if it is, feel free to delay it.
Ooh.
Where's this class end up numbers wise? Well, what does KU wind up taking, you think?
Taking overall, I think it's 19. I don't
Yeah.
think they'll add anyone else.
Okay.
I don't.
I didn't know if you thought they'd get another running back at some point, or if there'd be somebody else that they would. Obviously, like if there's a best player available situation where it's like, hey,
Yeah,
the 4-star kid's out there and he's available, whatever. But
for sure. Yeah, I think like if Jason Bradford called KU tomorrow and was like, actually, screw Oklahoma State and screw TCU, I want to go to KU. Like, yeah, they take him,
yeah,
but I don't think there's anything super close.
yeah,
Now we'll see, because I think you can look over the last couple of years and KU has typically added in the fall, but they've also had needs going into the fall. And so it's really a
sure,
question of, okay, is there maybe another defensive back that shows up? Maybe. I don't really see it. I think running back would be the spot where if there is a late riser that happens, maybe. But maybe that's a spot they just decide to take and go in the portal and go get one more experienced guy to kind of give them a group of kind of Thompson, Stewart, an experienced guy, and then you got the younger guys in the class. So no, I don't. I think 19 right now feels like what it's going to end up as.
yeah, yeah. Good
Cool.
deal. I was gonna say it's hard to see holes at this point, right? Like,
Yeah, it really is. Like, a lot of needs checked. And it's a good spot for KU to be in. So, all right, I think that's going to do it for this part. If you're a subscriber, go over to the website. We'll have a good Q&A. I've got a whole document here of questions from everyone in the thread. But for those of you who aren't subscribers, hey, you can always sign up and join and hear the other part. But thank you as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. I'll get you guys another podcast in a week. I'll be at Big 12 Media Days, so we'll do kind of our annual little recap where I'll go find a quiet spot and we can talk about everything we heard over the course of the 2 days in Dallas, Frisco, Arlington, wherever we're going. But thanks as always for listening. Make sure you leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. For Kevin Flaherty, make sure you are listening to the Verbal Commitment podcast and then the Pay Heed podcast. Both of those are on the KC Sports Network. Kevin does a lot of podcast work there. If you're not getting enough podcasts from me, I'm sorry. We're doing our best here. But make sure you go get your fix from Kevin. They do a great job over there. So make sure you listen to them as well. So thanks as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. We will talk to you all in about a week.